Hey, it's good to question authority. The authority problem is one of the central themes of A Course in Miracles, as we know, and one of Jesus's main points is that we want to question. We want to question all of our beliefs. We want to question our most deeply held beliefs and values and concepts. We want to, on a more superficial level, we want to question what people say and what people say to us about existential questions. We want to question people's versions and narratives, including our own, of course, and then decide for ourselves what, or maybe we're going to get to that place of I really don't know, right? And maybe that's the best place to be. Anyway, I say that to preface what I'm about to do, which is I'm about to read from this book, Journey Without Distance, The Story Behind A Course in Miracles by Robert Skutch, who I'm not sure if he's still living. I believe Judy Skutch is still living. Judy Skutch was one of the four main visionaries, you could say, behind A Course in Miracles. So there was Helen, there was Bill, there was Ken Wapnick, Dr. Ken Wapnick, and then they were all doctors actually, and then there was Judith Skutch Whitson. And some of the figures you don't hear as much about was like her husband Robert, who wrote this book, and he published it in 1984. So it really was Helen had just passed a few years before. Bill was actually still alive when he wrote this book. So I'm going to read the moment when A Course in Miracles from this book, chapter 4, the moment when A Course in Miracles came. And this is Robert's version of the story. Now, I think it is important to question, is this really what happened? Is this the official version? Whose version of the story was this? There are whenever you see quotes in narratives such as these, you have to ask yourself, well, is this what was really said, or is this just a post hoc, speculation as to what probably was said, or paraphrasing of what was said, or maybe it was, because let's face it, our memories are fallible. and sometimes we think we remember things very clearly, but memories can be very, very tricky things. So I'm just going to read, and if anyone has anything to say about this in the comments, please do. One day during September 1965, Helen told Bill she felt she was about to do something very unusual. She was concerned about the feeling because she had no idea what the quote something unquote was going to be. All she knew was that it was going to happen soon. Since Helen had started keeping a diary immediately after her visit to Virginia Beach, when they went to see Edgar Casey's son and the Association for the ARE, I believe. It was Edgar Casey's, Hugh Lynn Casey, Edgar Casey. They went to Virginia Beach where that was. So she started keeping a diary immediately after a visit to Virginia Beach. Bill suggested that if she wrote down whatever occurred to her in connection with the, quote, unusual something, unquote, she might get a clue as to what it was to be. Nothing came of her attempts at first, and she was on the verge of giving up the idea when one evening in October, while sitting in her bedroom, the now familiar inner voice began to give her definite instructions. So she had been hearing this inner voice, and it wasn't audition, it wasn't like hearing. This is gonna be talked about in a second. But she had been communicating in a sense with this, or getting messages from this voice for some time. She panicked and immediately telephoned Bill. You know that inner voice? It won't leave me alone. What is it saying? Bill asked. It keeps saying, this is A Course in Miracles, please take notes. What am I going to do? She pleaded. Calmly and supportively, Bill said, why don't you take the notes? Take them down in that shorthand you use. But Bill, Helen persisted, what if it's gibberish? Then I'll know I'm crazy. Helen, let me tell you something, he said, ignoring her remark. Since our Rochester trip, I've been doing some reading, which I haven't shared with you because you're so antagonistic to the whole subject, but there have been numbers of people, some of them very well-known people, who have had creative inspiration come through them in a mystical way. Einstein claimed to get information this way, and certainly the great playwrights, and what about all the mystical poets? I'm not a mystical poet, she protested. I'm a psychologist, and I don't know that I believe in this. Well, since you can't make it go away, why don't you take it down and bring it into the office early before the staff arrives, and we'll go over it together. And if it's gibberish, we'll tear it up and no one will ever know. Promise, Bill? Promise. Helen hung up, went into the living room, and told Louis, her husband, she was going to do some work in the bedroom and would be out shortly. She closed the bedroom door, turned off the overhead light, and sat in a chair by a lamp where she allowed herself to listen. This is what she heard that first night. And this is the introduction, the famous introduction to A Course in Miracles. This is A Course in Miracles. It is a required course. Only the time you take it is voluntary. Free will does not mean that you can establish the curriculum. It means only that you can elect what you want to take at a given time. The course does not aim at teaching the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught. It does aim, however, at removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, which is your natural inheritance. The opposite of love is fear, but what is all-encompassing can have no opposite. This course can therefore be summed up very simply in this way: nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. Although the voice wanted to continue, Helen was in a panic and she refused to listen further. She quickly closed her shorthand book and put it into the briefcase she carried back and forth to work each day. Then she went into the living room and told Louis she was going to bed. The next morning, Bill got to the hospital at 7:30, a half hour earlier than usual. He found Helen already there in a state of great agitation. I don't know what to do, Bill. I just don't know what to do about it. Bill suggested she read him what she had taken down and offers to type what she read since, quote, I'm a better typist than you, unquote. This she managed to do despite some uncharacteristic stuttering. She was stuttering. Sounds rather interesting to me, Helen, he said. Is that all there was? No, Helen answered. It seemed to want to go on, but I got afraid. How do the words come? Bill asked. It's hard to describe, she answered. It can't be an hallucination, really, because the voice does not come from outside. It's all internal. There's no actual sound, and the words come mentally, but very clearly. It's a kind of inner dictation, you might say. Do you know what you're writing? Bill asked, or would you describe it as an automatic process? Oh, no, it's not automatic at all. I'm perfectly aware of what I'm doing. So she wasn't channeling this. This wasn't automatic writing. It wasn't channeling. She called it inner dictation. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't that she was hearing a voice. She was getting the words somehow, and it was coming very internally, very quickly. That's why she had to write it all in shorthand. Why don't you try to write some more tonight, Bill suggested, see what happens. I don't think I can, she answered. I really find it too upsetting. Despite her reluctance to continue writing, she did not have the ability to eliminate the voice. This became obvious that very afternoon when she was on the telephone. As soon as she hung up the receiver, the inner voice began. She jumped up and hurried into Bill's office to tell him what was happening. After reassuring her again that there was nothing to be frightened about, he suggested that the best thing for her to do was simply to take the words down whenever they came and see if that were less disturbing to her than continuing to fight it. She argued with him for almost half an hour, pointing out that this was not what she wanted to do, but even while she was telling Bill this, during his responses, the inner voice would gently reappear. In desperation, Helen finally agreed to try to take the words down, but just until I see what it is, she added. It took less than 15 minutes for her to get an idea of, quote, what it is, unquote. For shortly after she returned to her desk, the voice began to dictate the first words of the text of A Course in Miracles. What she heard was Principles of Miracles, which began, and then the first 6 principles. The telephone interrupted, and Helen did not hear the voice again until the evening at home. when it continued dictating the principles of miracles right where it had left off at number 7. That night, Helen finished taking down the 50 principles of miracles begin the text. Now, they weren't 50. Now, I think there's some things we could definitely question about this story. I think Robert Skutch, who was writing this, I think he's getting some facts wrong from what we know now. Remember, this is 1984. Now, 40 years later, we do know some things that we didn't know before. There weren't 50 miracle principles, for example. But he says there were 50, right? And the miracle principles, I don't think the first 6, as he wrote them, I didn't read them, but the first 6 were not as he wrote them here. He wrote them as they came in the Foundation for Inner Peace edition. But remember, there were other versions of the course before the Foundation for Inner Peace edition that was published. There were several other versions. It went through different stages of editing. Bill, by the way, was the one who said maybe there should be 50. There were like 54 miracle principles, and Bill was like, maybe there should be 50 miracle principles, not 54, just to make an even 50. So that night, Helen finished taking down the 50 principles of miracles that begin the text. Even though she refused to read what she had written, she remained stunned. She did not have any idea of what A Course in Miracles was. It could have been just the 50 principles as far as she was concerned, but she did not know that the material was coming from she did know that the material was coming from an unusually authoritative voice, one she did not intellectually believe in. So she did not intellectually believe in it, but it was very authoritative, and she couldn't really shut it off too easily. She could try, but it was there. It was very incessant and insistent. Anyway, that's all I wanted to do was read that, and it's one of the official stories of how A Course in Miracles came to be. It's a nice story. It's a cool story. Is it exactly true? Probably not. I mean, there's always so many other things going on, right? Stories, by their very nature, are a way to put things succinctly and simply, because who has time to hear the more elaborate, complicated truth? And we all like a simple story that is just like, wow, that's a cool story. It's probably more complicated, and I think part of it is also Helen, what was really going on with Helen, and what did she know that she wasn't letting on, maybe? that's another thing, it's hard to see behind the mask many times, and I'm not engaging in too much speculation here. I don't want to do that. I just want to open to questions, right? Questioning authority, questioning what was really happening. But the fact is that this actually happened, right? This is more or less the way it happened. Now that you could kind of say, well, maybe it happened this way. It wasn't quite like that, but it was like this. But this is the basic story, and I don't think we can really refute that. We can't prove otherwise, at least. That's what happened, the way it happened. So anyway, we'll love your comments. We'll love your thoughts. Thank you for listening, and see you soon. Bye-bye.